Hey y'all, hey y'all, hey y'all, however this finds you, I do hope this finds you well. I am not going to be on here for a long time, but I'm definitely going to be on here for a time worth having because there's a recent conversation on AI surveillance and the workplace that has been sitting with me, honey. And honestly, I think they expose something much deeper happening underneath the AI boom. I think we are entering a phase of AI adoption that is less about innovation and more about behavioral control. Not through robots or sci fi, not the machines are taking over yet, but about control. Because what many companies are building right now are systems designed to monitor labor, quantify it, rank it, predict it, and ultimately discipline labor. May 20th was a dark day of many, sadly, for Meta employees. That was the target day for another round of major layoffs. What makes this moment especially unsettling is that these layoffs are happening while companies are aggressively pushing AI integration into the workplace. So workers are simultaneously being told AI is the future, while also realizing AI may increasingly become the mechanism of evaluating whether they remain employed at all. That is a completely different emotional relationship to technology than one that many signed up for initially. The public story around AI was supposed to be empowerment, efficiency, democratization, creativity, less friction, more possibility. But for many workers, AI is increasingly showing up as surveillance software wrapped in innovative language.
I would say that it's an interesting situation at Meta in particular because it feels like the workforce is at the moment split in two. You've got people who are being forced or encouraged to use AI as part of their job to make themselves more productive, allegedly. And you've got the other side of people who are being surveilled by AI. This kind of feels like it consolidates both of those trends. Basically, Meta is saying to workers, we need to understand a lot better what people need in the workforce and how they can use our AI products better. And therefore, we're going to track what you do and sometimes take screenshots and look at your keyboard and the way you actively work so that we can then use that to train our AI and make it better. And I think that this is kind of the bridge that crosses the two. It does feel like a moment that could end up in unionization and could end up certainly in a lot more resistance from people within the tech spin more widely.
And this really stays with me because it highlights the strange contradiction at the center of this moment. Workers are being encouraged and in some cases being pressured to integrate AI into their workflows in the name of productivity. But at the same time, the data generated from those same workflows can also become part of the system of monitoring, evaluating, and replacing them later on. And psychologically, that changes work altogether. Because once companies install systems that track your keystrokes, monitor your clicks, evaluate your communication habits, or potentially analyze your behavioral patterns, they are communicating something very, very clearly. We don't trust you unless your productivity is constantly measurable. Not your judgment, not your experience, not your process, and not your humanity. Everything becomes metrics. And one thing I think people underestimate is how quickly human beings adapt emotionally to surveillance environments. People begin performing work differently once they know they are constantly being measured. They optimize for visibility rather than meaning, and they want to appear productive rather than necessarily doing the work that is sustainable. And honestly, we already live in a culture that is shaped by metrics and outputs. Social media trained many people to optimize themselves around engagement, visibility, and algorithmic reward systems, likes, reach, impressions, virality. Now that is entering into the workplace.
I think the biggest problem is the lack of trust. So when you, as an employer, decide to put in especially higher levels of surveillance, especially AI powered surveillance, you're essentially telling your workers that you do not trust that they're doing a good job. You're also telling managers that you do not trust that they can manage workers properly and that they need some help. Already there's unspoken rhetoric around that, which it makes it very, very difficult for people to enjoy their work and make independent decisions. It puts that pressure, whether you like it or not, on people looking at their numbers, looking at their metrics and becoming concerned about them. You often find a situation where people are trying to game the system, not because they go from doing a job that they are excited about or maybe don't enjoy. They start suddenly looking at this system and saying, how can I position myself as best as possible within the system? The game stops being doing your job well and starts being, how can I allow this AI to rank me as highly as possible so that my job's not at risk, so that I don't get in trouble, so that I'm not perceived as being slow or less good as my colleagues. This doesn't seem to be something that anyone has found a solution to yet.
The game changing really hits me because that is exactly what happens in highly surveilled environments. The goal shifts from, am I doing meaningful work, to people start asking, how do I perform productivity in a way that the system will recognize and reward? Those are not the same thing. Don't get it twisted. Once workers become psychologically aware of algorithmic evaluation systems, creativity narrows by default. Risk-taking as well narrows, experimentation is gone, rest narrows. And even communication changes because people begin anticipating how systems are going to interpret their behavior. This is key because companies still frame workplace AI systems as being neutral tools. But no system is truly neutral once it starts shaping human behavior at scale. Another thing that stands out to me in this recent conversation was the issue of recourse. Human managers can absolutely be flawed, inconsistent, biased, or unfair. But algorithmic systems create a different kind of problem altogether. Their danger is not simply that AI systems make mistakes. Humans make mistakes too. The danger is what happens when workers lose meaningful pathways to challenge those mistakes. If a system flags your performance and your productivity score drops, your behavioral software misreads your work patterns, if AI ranks you lower than your peers, who do you appeal to, especially in this climate? I'll leave that there. Increasingly, companies themselves may default to trusting the system over trusting the worker because algorithms carry the illusion of being objective.
No system is perfect, but this democratization is kind of assuming that the AI will be more objective than a human being. In certain cases, I'm sure that could be the case. If everyone has had a foul manager, you might prefer for an AI to be evaluating you and managing you than a terrible manager. That's true. However, I feel like it makes a difference who can see into that black box and who can probe the data that the AI is looking at and gathering. And that does make a massive difference because let's say the AI decides you haven't gone to work today. Who do you talk to? Imagine if your manager and your manager's manager and your manager's manager's manager have no idea what is going on, and they have to work on the assumption that the AI is always correct, then it doesn't really matter, even if you do have a conversation with someone, if they're not able to probe that data and actually use it and say for themselves whether this data is correct or not. You enter into a situation where it's one of those horrible nightmare scenarios that you might expect from Black Mirror, where the algorithm has decided you've done this or you haven't done that, and the only people who could possibly save you are the CEO of your company and the C-suite, who are never going to look at your data. And so yes, you have a situation where a lot of workers have been fighting back, and you've got people who are trying to just game the system. And it feels very much that instead of a democratization of AI, we're looking at a performative culture rising, where people are just trying to desperately game the system, not because they're trying to not do their jobs or be lazy or anything like that, but to try to game the system so that the system doesn't penalize them and they don't end up at the bottom of the barrel. I think employers need to really evaluate whether the surveillance that they're actually doing on their staff is justified. Either you trust your workers or you don't.
The phrase human stopgaps honestly may be one of the most important lines in the entire conversation, because that is exactly what it feels like is disappearing across many systems right now, at least in my opinion. That context, that discretion, that nuance, everything becomes data, measurable, trackable. But human beings are not machines. Someone grieving does not work the same way every single day. Someone who is exhausted will not work the same way every single day. Someone who is deeply creative may not produce on a perfectly optimized schedule every single day. And yet, increasingly, these workplace systems are rewarding consistency over humanity, because consistency is easier for a machine to measure. I also found the discussion around Gartner research really important, because one of the things repeatedly pushed over the past 2 years is this idea that layoffs tied to AI adoption are simply the unavoidable cost of progress. But the conversation referenced Gartner findings suggesting companies aggressively reducing headcount while implementing AI were not necessarily outperforming companies that retained workers during adoption. That matters. If the promised productivity gains are not materializing at the level many executives and investors implied, then we need to be honest about what some of these layoffs actually are. Cost-cutting, market signaling, investor management, and narrative positioning. Meanwhile, workers are left navigating increasingly unstable workplace environments, layered with algorithmic monitoring systems and permanent uncertainty about whether they themselves remain necessary. And underneath all of this is a deeper ethical issue around dignity, not just labor rights, but dignity. There's something that is psychologically disabling about knowing your behavior may constantly be evaluated by systems you cannot fully see, challenge, or understand, and in some cases, human beings on top of that. That changes how people think, how they communicate, how safe they feel making mistakes, how willing they are to be vulnerable, experimental, and creative. And ironically, the same industry constantly talking about innovation may end up producing workplace cultures where people become too psychologically constrained to innovate honestly at all. That tension is not theoretical anymore. It's already here. And I honestly think that over the next few years, AI governance conversations are going to have to shift away from abstract ethics panels and towards labor conditions, workplace protections, surveillance law, algorithmic accountability, and psychological safety in the workplace. Eventually, people start asking a very simple question. If AI is supposed to improve work, why does work increasingly feel less human? Well, I told you I would not be on here for a long time, but it was a time worth having. As always, share this with somebody who needs a little inspiration or wants to think and wants some clarity today. Hit that like button, subscribe for more, and remember, until next time, you are capable of big things.